Hey, moms and dads, it's Dr. Scott back with this next edition of your onboarding mini course. And there's a bunch of things here that we're going to cover that are really important topics because they're really core to why so much of what we do gets such amazing results with yourself or with your child. So I'm going to go ahead and get our slide deck started here so we can get rolling. So the most important thing that we can talk about in this particular slide set is what is a subluxation. You'll hear this term from us often, but a subluxation is the key thing that we are caring for in our office. A subluxation is really, it's a multifaceted animal because we've talked about chemical, physical, and emotional stressors. And most of us, when we think about our spine, we think about our spine happening really only the physical component. But moms and dads, that's not at all the case. The more stress that our body is under, the more that we are likely to subluxate. And a subluxation has three main components. The first component is what we call the misalignment, and that's when we think about getting our spine aligned. It's not the most important part by even a little bit in this equation. The most important part is what is called the fixation. The fixation is a result of the misalignment, but it's a protection mechanism the brain uses when certain areas of the spine are stressed to a point where they can no longer adapt to the physical stresses, mental stresses, emotional stresses the body is going through. That fixation component cuts off a really important piece of our sensory system called proprioception. Proprioception is given to our brain through normal movement. We get it through all of our joints, all of our extremities by moving. And so when we talked about that dyskinesia, this is that dyskinetic component, that loss of motion, the fixation. What it does is it directly results in interference between the brain and the nervous system's ability to communicate. Interfering with the function of the nervous system in even small ways can have huge impacts. Think about when you've had a headache, what that's like. So, and that is something that's occurring at the top of the brainstem area of the spine. And in those areas, there's significant communication problems, but it can affect everything from your balance and coordination to pain, to the way that you're able to focus and pay attention, and the way that your brain and your body works in general can be dramatically altered by things such as a headache. And for those of you who don't know, well over 90% of all headaches, they come directly from subluxations at the top of the spine. If you or someone that you know is someone that is a chronic headache sufferer, it's spine related. We've treated hundreds, if not thousands of cases of people with headaches. And I can tell you this, very, very, very rarely is it anything other than that. The small variances would be things that are pathological, some that are endocrine, which are hormonally driven, but most of those are because of imbalances in the autonomic nervous system that started from this process. So the rest of those would be things that are in the vast majority of cases related to subluxations at the level of the spine. There's certain areas of higher importance, and we want to talk about this because we talked about headaches, but let's talk about kids. Let's talk about neurodevelopment. Let's talk about places of greatest value. So in the vast majority of our children, the area that's going to be subluxated first and foremost is the area that's affected via the birth process, which is here. What you're seeing is the top of the spine. So the vertebra that you can see that is tilted in yellow is called the atlas. That's the first vertebra in the neck. So the vertebra at the top, the atlas, the one beneath it called the axis, and the base of the skull, they have more sensory nerve endings for proprioception than any other part of the body does, period. The spine is loaded with proprioceptors. 60% of the proprioceptors in the body live on the spine. 33% of that 60% live right in this area here. So importance-wise, I'm sure you can realize that it's huge. It's higher than any other area in the body. So if we subluxate this area, it is a massive disruption to sensory input to our brain, sensory perception. So when we have a lot of kids that come in and they've got ADHD issues or focus and attention problems or ADD issues or sensory processing issues, in every single child that I have ever cared for, we find that this area is the area that is first and most affected because when we talk about things where there's like the physical trauma components, birth process, this is the area that the doctors use for a lever. They will pull on the skull and they'll twist the neck. And so in adjusting hundreds and hundreds of kids, many of them since birth, this area has always been an area that's been affected. And in all of the research that's out there, we see tremendous impacts in kids because of the fact that there's more interventions, there's more force, there's more effect to this area than there ever has been in the past. So think about this area as an area that is a really critical area. During the report of findings, we talked about the importance of stabilizing these areas. One of the reasons that we care so much about this area is because restoring normal motion to this area restores normal sensory perception to the brain, and it allows the area of the brain called the prefrontal cortex to begin to function more normally. And we see improvements in the way that we respond to stress. We see improvements in the way that our brain's able to organize information, process information. We see improvements in sensory function. We see improvements in immune function. We see improvements in issues with focus and attention. You name it, everything across the spectrum. So for those of you who haven't seen this, and for those of you who have, I want to touch base on this, because when we talk about subluxation, it's important to understand the relationship between the way that the spine organizes and areas of effect. And so in this chart, what you see is that the spine is very organized. So it's organized very similarly to the breaker box inside your house. And so when we look at this, each region has a very specific area of nerves that go to different organs, glands, cells, muscle groups, and have very specific effects. We know that the brainstem area controls all autonomic function, the vagus nerve, which regulates parasympathetic function, but also regulates our immune function, which also regulates the prefrontal cortex, which controls all executive function, lives there. We can see effects on balance, speech, immunity, digestion. There can be effects in things like the muscles of the face. We can see glandular effects. We can have issues with sinus drainage, inner ear problems like inner ear infections. Very typically, when we get a lot of the little ones that come in who have a lot of issues with colic, a lot of issues with sleep issues, we see issues with children that have GERD issues. It's because so many of the times when there are effects in this area, it's affecting the vagus nerve, because the vagus nerve controls all of those functions. We get a lot of kids who come in with issues with constipation. And so the top of the spine, the vagus nerve area, can be a component to that. But oftentimes we'll see that down in the lower spine, at the very bottom part that you see down there in blue, that area controls lower GI. It also is directly connected into immunity, because 80% of your immune system function lives in your gut. So if you have dysfunction or dyskinesia leading to that disafferentation, the disafferentation in the lower spine can affect everything from the gut immune system to hormonal controls, to the GI system, to the way that we're able to pass stool. So we see the vast majority of cases of constipation are direct effects in the areas such as the lower lumbar spine, and also issues with regulation through the autonomics as they go through the brainstem. Because these are signs that byproduct of the disafferentation now leading to issues with autonomic regulation, the inability of the body to go into rest, digest, elimination mode the way that it's supposed to. And there's a whole bunch of other effects. So keep in mind, as we talk about subluxation, there's a lot of different areas that can be affected, knowing that the subluxation of the spine disconnects the brain's ability to talk to the body the way that it's supposed to, and it directly disrupts healing. Remember, there is that process, that 5-step process, that dyskinesia, the initial subluxation, regardless of the cause, leads to disafferentation, which then leads to the dysregulation or dysautonomia, dysregulation of the autonomics, which leads to the symptoms expression, right? Dyskinesis, where we start seeing signs on surface EMGs, posture, behaviors, all of those things. And then progressively, they lead to greater and greater levels of imbalance in the brain, what we talked about disconnection, right brain, left brain imbalances. So understanding that this is a process is a really critical component to understanding, number one, the effects that subluxation has on your child or yourself, but also why it takes so much work to stabilize these things. And as we go through this process, we're going to dive deeper into all of the things you need to understand to make sure that you get the best overall result from your care. So mom and dads, I hope this was helpful for you. I will see you in the next slide, and keep engaging so that you can get the most out of your care, because we care so much about the results that your family gets, that our job here is just to create as many resources. And one of our favorite resources for you is this course, so that your family can have all of the best information so that we can be successful in your care, helping your child or yourself to have the best quality of life possible. See you in the next slide.